What is information worth? In modern society, quite possibly it's worth more than anything else. But when it comes to things that are supposed to be public, not everyone is actually able to access the data that they are entitled to. Now, blockchain technology has the potential to transform this, as we know, and that's what we're talking about in this episode of Future Rules with Michael Morisy. He's the founder of MuckRock, which is a non-profit organisation that helps people get information from the US government. It's great to have you with us, Michael. Can you talk to us about what the gaps are in the current system in terms of accessing data for users, and how MuckRock is set to bridge these?
We primarily work with journalists, activists, other people who are trying to open up government or help the public better understand their world. And a lot of times that means kind of going after and analyzing and then sharing really sensitive materials. What we've seen is that companies and oligarchs and governments are increasingly sophisticated in sort of how they pressure hosting providers, how they pressure ISPs to kind of remove that information. So what you see is sort of the people who really need to be exposed are instead the ones protected through a lot of these maneuvers. And what blockchain does, and what Filecoin in particular does, is kind of help flip that so that you don't have to rely on sort of one sort of legal regime or one sort of hosting provider to kind of make sure that those documents are accessible. And we've seen time and time again, access to these primary source materials is really what helps convince the public that this is a legitimate issue, right?
So that's the theoretical attraction and practice of how this works. How is Filecoin and IPFS protocol helping overcome these roadblocks?
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly you're seeing those theoretical challenges become real world challenges, right? I think one of the things we see is we had a countrywide block against one of our services because somebody filed a complaint about one document that we hosted. And that was, across an entire nation, we were unavailable for a week until we sorted out bureaucratically. And so what we're looking at is sort of the ability for Filecoin documents to be accessible via a range of ways to kind of route to that information. But also we've seen increasing pressure from hosting providers in terms of making this information available. So I think these things sort of seem theoretical. The splinter net seems sort of theoretical, but we're seeing sort of the edges of it, happening day to day for a lot of our users and across some of our services.
Regulation and lawmakers seem now to be catching up with a lot of this technology and bringing that into the regulatory sphere. How much concern do you think that that's going to have for those working in this sphere with data rather than with transactions?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's a really interesting time to be kind of like pushing the boundaries on some of these issues, right? And we've been talking with a lot of our users about GDPR, right? Okay, if they can push something to GDPR, but if they can push something to Filecoin, but they don't necessarily have the mechanisms to remove something from the network, what kind of liability does that kind of incur for them? What are some of the challenges, but also those opportunities? I think one thing we have consistently seen out of the European Union, GDPR regulations, right to be forgotten, is a lot of times that these come out as very well-meaning and in a lot of cases very important legislation in terms of sort of protecting privacy or making sure that there's ample competition. But instead, they kind of often have the opposite intent, right? We talked about the oligarchs who are using right to be forgotten and GDPR to kind of protect their misdeeds. And so I think this is a really important time where if we can get a strong civil society component in these discussions and we can kind of highlight these use cases and also these abuses, hopefully we can craft better regulation.
All right, that was Michael Morisy from MuckRock talking to us there. You'll be able to hear more about this and plenty else at the Phil Lisbon Summit. That is coming up on October 30th and running until November the 4th.